All right, let's go ahead and get started. So first, I just want to welcome you all today to this event, Fintech and AI, looking ahead. From the Center for Applied AI, I'm Emily Bembenek. I'm the director of the center. So I'm really excited to have you today. And if you're not familiar with the center, we're a somewhat new research center at Chicago Booth, do a variety of work in AI and behavioral science. So it spans a variety of domains. You may have seen it in science or in economics journals or referenced in the New York Times or the Washington Post. Today we're going to talk about finance, but we also do work in fields like criminal justice, healthcare, etc. Today we're talking about fintech and AI, and I'm really excited to have a great panel and moderator for you today. Our moderator is Da-Cheng Zhu, professor of econometrics and statistics here at Chicago Booth. And on our panel today, we have a few folks from across the industry, having different angles on fintech and AI. We have James Bray, who is a partner at Capital Group. He'll be joining us on the investment side. So has about 15 years of experience, I think, at Capital Group, and is responsible for investments in payments and a variety of areas that will be relevant to our discussion today. Avinash Gadkimbi is here joining us, Managing Director and CEO at Zaggle. James and Avi are both Booth alums, so welcome back to the Boothies, and thanks for joining us today. Avi has worked at Zaggle for a while and has worked across the world, across 5 continents, I think, in 12 countries. So has a prolific experience in thinking about finance and payments and how it's a way to kind of change people's access to finance across the world. And then Christina Key is joining us from Data Bento, where she's the CEO. Christina has been working in the field of AI and finance for quite a while, having been involved in high frequency trading back in, I guess, almost a decade now, when it hit the news and was quite a lot of interest in how hedge funds were using high frequency trading to move a lot of money very quickly. And she's become a voice in the field and has taught at a variety of universities, and we're excited to have her today joining us and offering her perspective. So welcome to all of our guests. Before I hand it over to Da-Cheng, I just want to say that we'd love if you would put your questions into the Q&A tool. So we'll be looking at those throughout the conversation. So if you have an idea pop into your head or a question, feel free to input it. If something is relevant and interesting, we'd love to address it as long as we have time. So please make sure to do that. Q&A tool is just right at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and pass it over to Da-Cheng. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to hear this conversation. Da-Cheng, make sure you unmute.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Emily, for introduction, and thanks for participating. It's my great pleasure to host this panel on AI and fintech. So as we know, AI is a field of study that enables machines to mimic human cognitive functions, such as learning and problem solving. Fintech is the use of technology to provide new and improved financial services. So some of us may be very bullish about the use of AI in finance, and others may be concerned about another AI hype or even a lurking crisis. Right? Since the beginning of AI, we have been through waves of AI winter. We have witnessed financial crisis originated from the tech sector. We have also seen crises arguably ignited by the use of advanced financial derivatives. Right? With this background, let me start the panel, and we will be discussing a number of questions related to AI and fintech. So why don't we start talking about your background and the experience in AI and fintech, and how did you become interested in this area? So Christina, would you like to start?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Christina Chi. It's really great to be here, by the way. So yeah, my background is I had run a high frequency trading firm for over a decade and then started a data company afterwards. And so yeah, my background in AI has been, I guess, spanning for quite a while in that we've definitely looked at AI in terms of both for strategies and the front office, but also for the back office for operations and, for other use cases. And we'll talk about that very soon as well, by the way. So really excited to chat about these topics. But so have come across this a lot. I will say one thing, by the way, is just quick story. 10 years ago, I was on a panel on the same topic on AI, actually. And this was back when it was like brand new and people didn't know what AI stood for or ML, machine learning, that this was still like a new thing in this industry in finance. And I remember one of the panelists was like, oh, give it like a few years and AI is going to take over hedge funds. We're not going to need any traders anymore. Here we are 10 years later, and there's more traders than ever, human traders. So there's I'm one of the people who is not as bullish maybe as some of the other folks out in the industry, just given my personal experience dealing with it. But we'll talk about that later. So I will pass it on to James.
James.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. So I started writing code in the 1980s on an Atari 400. And we got that computer because it had a membrane keyboard, and my parents thought if we spilled something on it, being messy kids, it wouldn't damage it as much. So I've had a long-standing interest in computer science. Prior to coming to Booth, my professional background was actually in music and software engineering. And I started investing in the payments industry maybe a little over a decade ago, back before it was really kind of viewed as an industry the way that it is now. And I spend my time investing in a variety of late-stage private and public companies. And I often like to say a company's income statement is the output of people, processes, and technology. So I really try to go deep on the tech. And as AI has become more important in various use cases that we'll be talking about today, I started spending more time with engineers and subject matter experts and just really have had a lot of fun learning more about it.
Hi, everyone. Avi this side from India. I started coding in 95, so a little later than James, Fortran, if some of you remember that. And last, I was an engineer. I'm an engineer, electrical engineer, and then went to Booth, class of '08. Traveled around the world, worked with banks, Barclays in London, ING in Brussels, Citi in the US and India. And last 11 years running Zaggle. We are a SaaS fintech company digitizing spends through automated workflows. And we work with, we're a B2B2C company, largely working with enterprise and mid-market companies. In India, one of the few profitable fintechs at scale in India. And that's about Zaggle. My experience with AI is because we work with a whole host of users, a little over 2 million users. We primarily offer expense management, vendor payments. We process tons of invoices and tons of receipts. And we try to use tech, optical character recognition, OCR, to be able to read these invoices and to make sense out of them. And sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. But I'm overall very bullish about AI being able to aid businesses, and especially fintech companies, to make things better for humanity. So, Christine, we're probably on the other side of the spectrum.
Excellent. So in 20 seconds, could you please, each of you, summarize your overarching view on the use of AI in finance? Are you bullish about it, or do you have some concerns about it? Let's start with James this time.
I would sum it up in one word: expected. And I think that just kind of goes to show how rapid and easy the adoption has been. I think it's just expected to be used on a go-forward basis.
How about you, Christina?
So if all of the AI tools in the world were like one person, let's say someone like we could hire, they would be a junior employee, but they wouldn't be the lead, the head of the quant trading division. They wouldn't be leading the way in this space. And so that's how I would word it. It's useful. It's like a great assistant, but you shouldn't be over relying on AI to do all of your job. So yeah.
Navinash?
Yeah, I think AI is, if I were to say it, a great tool, brings efficiency, speed, can't be the final decision maker or the arbitrator. I agree with Christina on that. You can't entirely rely on it because the mistakes that AI might make might be far and few in between, but catastrophic. So you need some intervention.
Okay, great. So seems like we all agree on that AIs are great tools. And let's focus on a few areas of finance where AI has been playing an important role increasingly. So maybe let's start with asset management, right, and trading. So Christina, James actually, so how do investment firms and hedge funds leverage AI these days?
Well, I think we sometimes talk about AI as a huge world-changing mega trend. But in practice, I think it's often been using very precise tools to solve very well-defined problems a little bit better. And in my personal experience, often the more mundane the problem, the bigger the impact, because we tend to perceive things that we do all the time as being a little bit mundane. And so a good example that I can offer is search. In the last week, I started just cataloging the types of things that I read because I read a lot for my job as a research analyst. And I've read company filings, earnings call transcripts, press releases, product reviews, academic journal articles, research reports, and probably a few other things I didn't mention. And when I started 15 years ago, if I wanted to get a point of view on a company's potential revenue growth, I would have to do a lot of different keyword searches. I'd search for revenue. I'd search for sales. If I was feeling clever, maybe I'd search for new product. And with NLP, now when I search for revenue growth or sales growth, the list of the list of highlighted paragraphs and documents I get will also include sales growth or new product launches, or maybe even something that I hadn't contemplated, like merger synergies, but in an answer to a question that was asked about revenue. And then beyond that, the documents will highlight the relevant sentences, and they'll even shade them green or red, depending on the sentiment in the answer. So it's just a great example about how multiple AI innovations have taken something that I do as part of my day-to-day action and made it a little bit better and a little bit faster, and has freed me up to cover more ground more effectively.
Thank you. So Christina, you had a lot of experience in the trading and the hedge fund and high frequency trading. Would you like to say something about this question as well?
Sure. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, AI it can assist you in exactly what James said, right? In helping with certain parts of your research process when it's super defined. There are some areas where there's some weaknesses, I would say, in terms of, so for example, when we're analyzing earnings calls, right, with CEOs, and when you see a CEO on TV on CNBC somewhere, and he's saying everything's fine, but he's shaking his head like everything's fine. Half of human communication is nonverbal, right? And so even if a machine were to take everything's fine and then analyze that, it doesn't really mean much when you look at him and he's shaking his head and he's sweating and he's gulping, and you can tell something's going wrong behind the scenes. And so I guess the ultimate lesson learned here is just the human is the most complicated machine. And as much as an AI tries to catch up and understand this kind of human behavior, there are some nonverbal cues, for example, that sometimes are hard to get unless you really take a closer look. And so yeah, we've definitely come across situations where just a simple language processor wasn't able to capture quite completely like the situation that's happening within a company, for example. And that being said, for HFT in that world too, there were definitely some areas where we felt like we did some basic, I guess, linear regression models and things like that, but nothing so great as being like really complicated deep learning or anything like that. So just there are some areas that you could apply these models in when it comes to there being a lot of defined data. But then the challenge is, by the way, that I like to say this a lot, which is, there's a reason why like we don't have like an AlphaGo in the financial space that is just, let's say an AI hedge fund that's making more money than all the humans. Actually, we do. There's IBM Watson's ETF, AI out there. So it's created by IBM Watson. For those who aren't familiar, they have an ETF, and it has not outperformed even the S&P. You might as well just long the S&P and make more money than what IBM is doing with Watson, which is like multi-million-dollar funded AI tool that is trading out there in the markets. And so it just goes to show that, sometimes, you can do better even without the AI. But there's a reason for that, by the way. It's because the rules in the market are not so well defined sometimes. There's new rules, market microstructure changes all the time. There's new stocks that are IPOing every day, and there's not a lot of historical data on how they're going to trade. So there's all this kind of new information coming in, and everyone kind of plays by slightly different rules at the end of the day. And so given all those different factors and how complex the markets are, there's a huge reason why. Whereas like if you look at Go or chess, all those tools, chess is a defined game with a defined set of rules, and it's binary, you either win or lose. It's very, very like there's been these years of historical data they can train on. And so I'd say there's definitely pros and cons. We're getting, are we going to get there? Maybe one day, but not for now. I think it's still a while away before we end up having this machine run fund that can outperform over a long period of time.
Thank you for that. So I guess maybe, one of the promising uses of AI is not directly on trading yet, but perhaps on processing alternative data. Data is actually the new oil in the world of AI. So speaking of data, I know, Christina, you recently has started up a company called Data Bento, right? So, and you are actually managing a lot of data. So let's talk about data management. So what are the major challenges of AI fintech with respect to this area?
Oh, for sure. There's so many. One is that actually, for a human to process all this data, we're dealing with like petabytes of data, right? And it is true, like for a human eye to be able to analyze that much data, it's almost impossible. It'd take you, 2 lifetimes sometimes to be able to actually look at every data set. And so of course, having a machine to aid you in that process is extremely helpful in that sense. It's almost like, we think of it like, having a calculator there to kind of help you with your calculations, to help you with analyzing and screening all this data. For sure, it's definitely really helpful. There are some weaknesses, though, that we do discover when it comes to alternative data. I would say the number one thing that we discover when using AI or machine learning techniques on alternative data is that the data set sometimes is too small. More often than not, actually, when a startup comes to us and they're pitching like, hey, we have this alternative data on like Walmart parking lots, where it's like satellite data and you can see the foot traffic coming in and out of Walmart to kind of guess how Walmart's doing before their earnings calls. Okay, that's great. But how big is this data set? And it turns out, okay, they only have 2 years of data on this. It's very limited. And sometimes it's just not enough data for an AI to be able to make an accurate prediction on what's actually going to happen. So I think sometimes that does happen. And so I just wanted to mention those things just because I know, yes, we're in a world where, and we'll talk about ChatGPT, I'm sure very soon, but we're in a world where, yes, everyone is using AI. My brother's using ChatGPT to apply to internships right now. He's 12 years younger than me. So stuff like that is happening out there. But at the same time, I think there are some weaknesses of those systems. And I think it's just good to discuss those. So, yeah.
Thank you. So, Amy, you have obviously been handling lots of sensitive data and lots of important data related to our individuals' finance. And would you like to say something about this as well?
Yeah, I mean,
I think...
so. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Ravi. Sorry.
Yeah.
Avi,
So I think I second what Christina said. Right. It's the quality of data, and it's also how much data you have. In some situations, your data set also gets totally skewed because of events like COVID. Right. COVID just threw everybody off guard. AI doesn't necessarily understand how to deal with that as well as possibly at times humans, because you possibly don't know how to train it. So it's also dependent on how well you can train it, especially when it comes to machine learning. We use a lot of ML when we read receipts, invoices, and it takes a certain amount of work to get those those things going. So there are dependencies, and then there are gamers. There are people who understand that we are using a particular tech, and they try to slip in the odd fake receipt, and you try and at least get the system to flag it off as something that I can't read, right? So one of the things that we've been able to do is get our system to start flagging off, even if it's a potential false positive. At least it flags it off, parks it, and we do have folks who actually look into those cases. So that actually, especially when it comes to finance and individual data, is a very important aspect, because you don't want a scenario where everything's getting processed only by the system, and the system goes wrong in some way. At least the system should be able to flag off some of these things. So those are the challenges that we've seen, but all in all, it's reduced a lot of our manual work. Can't complain.
Thank you. So we know that if data are biased to begin with, then AI will be biased, like garbage in, garbage out, right? So James, can you see something like how can we deal with how can we mitigate biases of AI, if any?
Ask Sendhil about that. Jokes aside, and that one's funny because it's probably true. I think governance actually is very important. And I think if you step back, like where can bias come into these data sets and steer us in a undesirable or unanticipated direction? One area is parameter definition, right? The model will do exactly what you tell it to do. But the problem is that business people can often be very, very loose with their terminology. And that can cause sort of handoff problems. A second one is understanding the biases in the data set. And, I agree with what Christina said about a lot of the alternative data sets. They all have a lot of biases in them. And in a classic case, actually, that I think has been talked about at Booth is claims data for healthcare. I mean, we have unequal access to healthcare. That means the claims data is biased. So any model outcomes that are kind of formulated on that data are going to have some biases in them. And the third thing I think is explainability. If you can't explain why the model does what it does, then logically, I think it would be very hard for you to say that there's no bias there or there is bias there. We just don't know. And the fourth is peer review. I really think, when I invest, I really think data advantages wind up being more important to companies than model advantages over time. I just think that when you look at when unicorns were founded, so many of them were founded after AWS came out, which means they don't have legacy tech debt in how they manage or store their data. And that's a huge advantage when you start feeding models. And as a result, I think peer review doesn't really pose a threat to many companies' business models. So when you kind of add those things together, I think it kind of points in the direction of governance, because most of the time, if you get a bunch of MBAs or business people telling engineers to do something, they'll just do it to make their managers happy. And that means if the parameters are properly defined or not, and if the data is biased or not, or explainable, the MBAs just want the results and the engineers will go and do that. And so I think the role of governance is to put in the right guardrails around those interactions. I think that the right governance structure is probably something we'll have a better understanding of 10 years from now than we will today. But I think directionally, a diverse group of people with functional expertise, domain expertise, subject matter expertise, who can really kind of look at these problems from multiple angles and ensure that things are being done the right way, can help mitigate some of the risks around bias creeping into the processes and outcomes.
Thank you. So, let's actually, ask Avi about this question, because we know one of the important value proposition of fintech is inclusive, right? So, and in reality, when you deal with the payment, loan and other areas, you might end up getting some biased, outcome because of issues with the data input. Would you like to comment on that based on your experience?
Yes, I think, again, just to add to what James mentioned, right, it's also important to take a step back and periodically take a high-level view of what the AI is suggesting, right, and see if there is a clear pattern of bias. It happens for sure. It also happens in more diverse environments. India is a very diverse country, a lot of complexity, fairly large population, as I think everybody knows. So that again creates fairly, interesting scenarios, especially when it comes to lending. We don't lend, but we work with a lot of lenders who use post-consent, who lend on our user base. And you do see some of these rejects coming in, especially with credit cards, right? And that's bias around zip codes, that's bias around a lot of things. So periodically just taking a step back and looking at some of this information is a good way of, detecting those biases and then trying to retrain your programs to do a better job of it. It's a lot of work. I think anybody who's worked on AI and ML would know that I haven't heard of anybody who's said that we got it right the first time, right? And we consistently get it right every time.
Thank you. So before we move on to the next topic, I'd like to address one of these questions that audience have asked. So Christina, would you like to address Andrew's question? So Andrew asked, in your experience, which particular AI techniques, ML models, or reinforcement learning do you see as the most promising for use in price prediction and algorithm trading?
Wow, that's a great question. I think at this point, we are seeing some, basic reinforcement learning in this space a little bit. ML models, absolutely. There's, some right now. I think there's, we ran actually primarily rules-based strategies, but we did do some ML-based strategies as well, and mainly just basic linear regression. Nothing too complex out there or anything like that. I think if you get a little bit more on the complicated side, I think there are some funds that are doing that today, but it's just it's highly controlled environment, highly limited in terms of the scope of what they can do, and the key is just to be careful, because an AI can run a perfect back test, by the way, but then what you notice is it doesn't actually work in the real world when you're actually trading it live, and you're like, why doesn't it work? I ran a perfect back test. And there's so many reasons behind that, but it could be overfitting, you could have data mining biases, look forward biases, whatever it is, that the AI doesn't, can't quite adjust for sometimes. And so we try our best to be careful about that. But for us, to be honest, personally, we didn't use too deep, we weren't using deep learning too much in the role at all for quantitative trading. So yeah, I'm not sure if James is doing something, more complex than that, but I would be curious too.
Thank you. So let's also try to answer Andy's question. So Andy is especially interested in learning how AI might impact the area of holistic financial planning advice. So how might AI aid and or replace the work being done by financial advisors? James, would you like to address this question?
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not a financial advisor. A financial advisor would say to their client, you should invest this much money in equities and give some of that to James's organization, and we would invest on behalf of that person. But one use case that I think would be somewhat similar that a CEO shared with me is using ChatGPT to build profiles of people. So, for example, could you basically feed someone's LinkedIn profile into ChatGPT and have it write their bio? That would have saved Emily a little bit of time because, she had to get my bio and we had to confirm that we had it, et cetera, right? And when a financial advisor sees a customer, the first thing that they want to understand is how old is this person? Where do they work? Where did they go to school? Just have a basic profile. So could a tool speed something like that up? And again, I think it's another example. I love what Christina said about AI tools being like an assistant, right? It just takes a very mundane, routine part of what financial advisors do every single day and hopefully makes it a little bit better. And assistants won't get everything right, but maybe some percentage of the time it will make those engagements a little bit easier. And when it doesn't work well, the cost of failure is pretty low. That would be one scenario off the top of my head.
All right, thank you. Since many of you have actually mentioned ChatGPT, so let's directly talk about it, right? So as we know, ChatGPT has changed our life almost overnight. And there's currently lots of debate in multiple sectors, education, other areas, why ChatGPT should be banned or should be used. So I wonder, what's your take on this new technology? Like, how can we do with it? Any concern about it? So maybe let's start with Christina.
Sure. So I have a funny story about this. So for one of our interviews, we interviewed for a couple of writing positions in our company. And for the writing position, we usually give them a take-home writing assignment. It shouldn't take like an hour or just, very short kind of assignment. By the way, the reason we do the writing take-home is because some people get flustered when they do it live. So we'd rather just have them do it as a take-home and do it in their own time. And so we've been sending these take-homes, and in January, we received 5 of the take-homes back. And they were 5 of the best quality take-homes I've ever seen. And it's about a technical topic, by the way. This is about microwave towers. It has nothing to do with our company. So we always make sure it's nothing to do with our company, but it's like similar in a related industry. So we're writing about microwave towers, and which is like a very niche topic. And we received 5 very polished, very good, at least from the surface, really, really beautiful writing take-homes that we received back. And we're like, wait a second, these are all 5 are within the 90th percentile. They are better than 90% of the other take-homes that we received in the past. And so we were like, wait a second, like this is really strange. And then we kind of looked at all 5 of them. We're like, wait a second, there's some similarities between all 5 of them. And so then we were like, okay, there's some of them were slightly different, but then there's like, some sentences that seemed relatively similar. The structure seemed pretty similar. And then, we heard on the news about ChatGPT, and I got an account and I copy pasted our prompt into ChatGPT, and lo and behold, we found the culprit. It was ChatGPT. All 5 candidates were already using ChatGPT behind the scenes already, and this was back when it was still kind of breaking the news and people had just started hearing about it, which is absolutely insane. And so then we faced a decision that I think every company is going to have to make at some point, which is bot or no bot for processes like this, right? Like, do we allow job candidates to use ChatGPT and other whatever tools they want to at their disposal, or do we want to just say no bots, like show us your true skills, your true writing ability, because it's a writing job. And so that definitely made me think a lot. We had many discussions with the team about what to do in this kind of context. And just to long story short, was we actually ultimately decided yes, we're going to let candidates use these bots in this process. We're actually one of the few companies where we don't use a robot in the screening process, by the way. We discovered that some of our best candidates, did not go to a top school, for example. And so there weren't a lot of factors we wanted to screen for, because again, humans, the most complicated machine. We didn't want a machine to be analyzing who we should hire. That would be, I don't know, it just didn't seem right for me. But we did let candidates, we decided, okay, if you're a candidate and you're doing a writing test, go ahead and use ChatGPT, but we will use a bot detector, and then we'll analyze the work that you put on top of it. Like, what deeper research can you do? Can you cite your sources and find other areas that maybe ChatGPT couldn't, discover? So doing some deeper work on this topic instead. So yeah, it's definitely affected all of us though in this space, for better or worse. And I'm glad. I think for me personally, I think it's just, this is the future. So yeah, happy that it's around, but definitely concerned about, like Dachong, you asked about the data sourcing, right? And I don't know if you guys have seen, for example, ChatGPT does get their data from some very sketchy sources, or sources that didn't approve, I guess, of being used as a source for data. A lot of fan fiction websites, for example. Same with Lensa. If you guys have heard of on Facebook, everyone's posting, photos of them like a superhero. Lensa is like the AI tool that does that. But if you notice in some of the Lensa pictures that people are posting, there's like the mangled signatures of artists, the original artist, who probably has no idea, or now they probably do, but it's just like totally like, wow, this poor artist who, their work is being used in AI across, millions and millions of users are doing this, but they're not getting any money from it. What does that say, about the future of this industry? And and how ethical, the ethics of this, right? And so, yes, it's being, all these tools are already on, going and spreading like virally, but what can we do? How do we give credit to the right people? I don't have the answer to that. I just think that it's a topic that should be on everyone's minds.
Thank you. Avi, have you started using it already? And do you have any plan using it for your company?
Yes, yes, Dashing. Basically, I think the simple take that I have on this is it's inevitable, right? It's come out. It's like, any tech that's available, you gotta accept that people are going to use it, right? You can accept it grudgingly, or you can embrace it, or you can be somewhere in between. That's your call, right? So we've started using it. We have a chatbot. We try and use it there. There are other areas that we're using it. There are other areas where employees or team members have started to use it to make their life easier, like writing specs, etc., which we sort of anticipated, and it's absolutely fine because we in a sense it's almost like any of the other technologies. There is always a plus and a minus, a pros and con, and you need to be able to understand that it's going to make an impact. We got to be careful. I think Christina raised some very important ethical questions there. So those are things that we all need to be mindful about. But I guess it is going to make huge difference in our lives.
Thank you. So James, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. The day that ChatGPT came out and broke the internet, I was traveling and I left my credit card at a hotel. And I got out the bank app that I use. And I'll say, as large institutional investors, we've had the privilege of meeting with all of the large bank CEOs. And I won't name this person or their company, but assume they run a really, really big bank that's been investing billions of dollars, plural, in technology for a while, to have a major technology advantage that will manifest as awesome service. So I thought, great, this is going to be a terrific opportunity to go into the app and solve my problem. And I went into the chat bot and said, I lost my card, I need a replacement. Can you turn off the old card and send me a new one? And it didn't understand. And I went back and forth with this chat bot several times, and eventually it said, call this phone number. And I had to call, and I was put on hold for 15 minutes while waiting for a service rep. And this is like it's a card I use for a lot of business expenses. It's a pretty high value card. And while I was on hold, I was having ChatGPT explain the Napoleonic Wars to me and all this other stuff. And I thought, wow, this guy has spent a lot of money on chatbots, and this thing really just sucks compared to what I'm using right now. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities to just improve the status quo here. I think the one thing with ChatGPT that hasn't been mentioned is the hallucination problem. It's a little bit like a politician, in the sense that if it doesn't really have an answer to a question, a lot of times it will just give you an answer anyways. And so I think that none of these models are perfect, and we have to think a lot about what is the cost of a wrong answer. And I think for a lot of use cases, the hallucination problem can still result in some pretty high potential costs or risks. So that's an area that I would really focus on and watch for improvement in.
Thank you. All right, so let's move on to the next topic. So we know payment is perhaps the largest piece of the fintech industry, right? So we have seen so many unicorns out of this sector. So Avi, how do you think, how did AI facilitate this sector, given your experience?
Yeah, I think AI has made a huge difference, right? So if you look at any of the use cases, first the authentication. I mean, know your customer, KYC, is a big friction point, and it's very important because if you're not able to catch hold of the wrong folks, then you're in trouble. So that's one area where you see face detection, biometric, a lot of that getting used. In India, we have video KYC. So you get authenticated through a video, and that's pretty effective. It also picks up holograms. It also picks up, all kinds of naughty stuff that people try to do to be able to beat the video KYC. So it's not, as with everything, it's not perfect, but it's fairly accurate. We also see in payments in Zaggle, we use behavior of users, and basis their behavior, we decide what sort of coupons or deals we offer. Fairly old use case of AI, but fairly effective. And it's something which we've seen really make a difference when your scale increases. You don't have to actually think of what to offer to which user. Data processing, we see that helping with invoices, with completing payment instructions, especially for enterprise and mid-market customers when they're making bulk payments. That can be quite tedious. The system is able to automate that. We also, as I mentioned, see that in the use of chatbots, so service. So there are a lot of these areas that AI has made a difference. AI tends to sort of sit in the background, but it's there. And in our case, we have also seen it, as I mentioned, in OCR, optical character recognition, to read the invoices and the bills. We have a plethora of languages in India and different scripts. So again, there AI becomes very handy because otherwise you need essentially somebody who's not only going to read each receipt, but she needs to be able to read receipts in multiple languages, which is a nightmare. So yeah, those are some of the areas. That's it.
Thank you so much. And James, would you like to add to this as well?
Yeah, we've invested in a few of these unicorns, some when they were still private and some when they IPO'd or later. And I think there's actually a longer story here. I think that if you look at when a lot of these unicorns were founded, they were generally founded around the time AWS, Amazon Web Services, cloud computing became more widely available, or shortly after that. Sorry for the background noise. Just gonna let this guy pass by here. And I think there's a reason for that. And I think it's also very relevant to AI. The first thing is that cloud computing really lowered the barriers to a startup. It took a lot of these high fixed costs and made them variable. And then what happened was application providers realized there was an opportunity to make themselves available on Amazon Web Services. And that bootstrapped this application ecosystem. And Amazon directly contributed to this in areas like Redshift and sort of made it easier to store data, whether it was structured or unstructured, and combine these data sets very efficiently. And as a result, I think the newer companies that started in this era were not burdened by the technology debt of old databases that were siloed and don't talk to each other, and all of the sort of problems and slowness that can come from that. And as a result, in payments, I think that's very powerful, because what is payments? It's really a message. It's a message that has to be delivered very quickly and very accurately. And that is a great use case for cloud computing. And when you then put in this overlay of AI and ML, fraud models, et cetera, it's just they were very well positioned to derive the value from these models immediately. And because the data sets are there and they're well curated and they're all in one place, the models can be trained continuously, and the flywheel effect really kicks in. And what you see, what I see at least, is when I compare sort of like the fraud models and the outcomes of some of the older legacy companies against these newer companies, even though the legacy companies might have more data, the newer companies actually deliver better outcomes in terms of yields to the merchant or whatever sort of variable is being solved for. So I think the AI is important, but I think of the AI as sitting on top of, it's sort of the tip of the iceberg. And it's a lot of the stuff that we don't see or talk about under the water that really makes the AI powerful and allows these companies to reap the benefits of the models.
Thank you. All right, so let me collect a couple of more questions from the audience. So Wendy L has a question. Do you expect AI, such as ChatGPT, will replace much of basic financial accounting work?
I can answer that actually. So we actually used an AI a bookkeeper, by the way, many years ago, actually 2 or 3 years ago, let's say. We used an AI bookkeeper, and not only was it more expensive than a human bookkeeper, but it made a lot of errors that we had to go back and like have a human bookkeeper come in and fix. You know, the role of, and this is one thing I always debate about with my team. I'm like, okay, look, back when we were like a very early stage startup, I was like, okay, why do we need to pay so much money for like a CFO or for a bookkeeper, right? And then when you look at it, you realize the role of a CFO or CPA, someone who's doing all the bookkeeping and accounting, is to catch that 1 in 1,000 situation where something does go wrong, where it doesn't make sense, you know, and maybe it does in the data, like, oh, if you've been paying this invoice every month, oh, but we had actually canceled that invoice. We canceled that vendor a month ago, you know, and that's something maybe an AI might not be able to catch on unless it's scanning your emails or something. And so there's been situations like that, you know, where having a human has been able to save our company quite a lot in terms of expenses. So we ended up actually removing our AI bookkeeping tool and using like a human bookkeeper who is not only cheaper, but actually spots those 1 in 1,000 errors that a bot might not be able to catch. And so, yeah, I think it can replace a lot of it. You're right, like some of the basic financial accounting work, but I would consider the cost of it. And then I would never use an AI to completely replace all of your financials because, you know, when you get audited, oh my gosh, you never know. There's so many things that could possibly, you know, go wrong on that side. So I'd be very careful on over relying on an AI for any important function in the company. Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right, so maybe it's time to talk about the future of AI in fintech. You know, unfortunately, we have seen lots of layoffs in the tech sector lately, and we have seen actively managed ETF funds, tech funds that do not outperform the market, and some of them did terribly recently. So let me ask maybe Abby to comment on like what are the key challenges AI and the fintech startups are facing the next few years, right? So,
well, two separate topics, and I'll touch on both here. And touching one is the layoffs, right? Again, this is inevitable. We had an economy which would, you know, heat it up too much. We all, a lot of us from the Booth School have our views. I have mine as well. And it was, to some extent, going to happen. We were seeing salaries just shoot up in a crazy manner for tech, right? And there was, you know, a bubble, and it had to sort of cool down. So that's something which is going to be the typical cycles. I don't think that layoff has too much to do in the immediate basis with AI. That secular trend exists. Technology is going to make jobs more and more, you know, complex. Those complex jobs are going to be done by the humans, right? And the simpler tasks, the mundane tasks, as James mentioned, would get replaced. And that's, again, been happening for the last, I don't know how many years, how many decades, right? And that process has got accelerated with each tech cycle and revolution. It's got accelerated. Coming to the challenges that fintechs face, I think one is competition, right? And you have the behemoths. In India, we see Google is into payments. We see Amazon is into payments. We see WhatsApp is into payments. Everybody's leveraging the unified payment interface to make real-time payments. In India, you can make a payment to anybody whose phone number you know on the fly in real time, right? So there's a lot of tech that's being built, infrastructure rails that have been built by actually surprisingly the regulators and the government entities. And all these companies are just coming in. So tech is one. Definitely data privacy is an issue. And that's something which we are GDPR compliant, although we don't need to, but we work with large enterprises. So, and we think it's a good thing. But a lot of companies aren't. And you're seeing B2B companies being acquired by B2C companies, and that data is now getting used, and that's not necessarily with consent, and that's not necessarily how it should be used, right? And that leads to trust issues, user trust issues, spam communication coming in. So there are a lot of those things which I think fintechs will have to address. Otherwise, you'll see regulators step in, and that's generally, in my view, not a great scenario.
Thank you for that. So Christina, you have started up 2 companies so far. So what kind of challenges are you facing here in the next few years?
Yeah, good question. So I think for us as a startup, it's mainly about, okay, can we be able to innovate in this space? And can we, do we decide on those decisions, right? Like using AI, using ChatGPT and other bots. And a lot of those decisions are ethical, to be honest with you. These are decisions where I'm like, okay, well, it's a no-brainer. If I'm going to use, it's almost like a calculator. If I want to use a calculator to do an assignment, like, yeah, I remember I grew up in an era where calculators were not allowed actually in certain parts of the classroom. And now, everyone's using it, advanced calculators, whatever, Wolfram Alpha, right? There's all those cool tools out there that people are using. But back then, we were very limited in terms of what we were allowed to use in the classroom. And so, for us, it's more like, for me, it's a no-brainer, like, let's go use it. But the question is, well, these tools, are they getting their data from the right source? And could we ever run into any legal trouble if we over-relied on one of these tools for, let's say, writing copy on our website, for example, right? And then someone says, hey, that was my work, for this fanfic site in like 2008. and hopefully not, but that's a really long stretch, I know. But in case it does happen, I'm sure one day that will be in the news, like, hey, some company used this tool, and it turns out it was, that tool was taking their data from an illegal source. And so that's my biggest concern when it comes to, AI and working in this startup space is we want to be ahead, we want to innovate, but what are the limitations, and what are the potential ethical as well as legal risks that we could run into? And I will say, in terms of layoffs, by the way, just a quick topic as well. I don't know. I know, Bijesh, you asked about, scientific papers, right? I don't know if you heard Meta or Facebook/Meta. They created this tool. I forgot the name of it. They had a tool that an AI. And it looked at, I think it was like 48 million papers or something crazy like that. It's called Galactica is the name of it. They looked at like 48 million scientific papers, and they were supposed to be like an AI for science, basically, in the scientific space. And they shut it down after 3 days, apparently. And it's because, again, when you have AI that's giving you, what's supposed to be scientific knowledge on some very niche scientific topic, even though there's 48 million papers it was able to train on, it was still incorrect on certain things. And so, ChatGPT, by the way, does an okay job at one thing, which is that sometimes when I ask it a question like, hey, can you help me predict like what stocks are going to do good? ChatGPT will actually say, hey, I'm not capable of doing that. And I love that answer, by the way. I appreciate that a bot is saying, hey, like, I appreciate your question, but I cannot do this as my limited function, and so I like that some bots are starting to do that. But again, like, just wanted to mention that there are limitations, and it's important for a bot to know when its limitations, when it actually reaches that limit, basically. So, yeah.
All right, thank you. So, James, from investment point of view, right? So what areas do you see lots of potential opportunities for startup?
I mean, it's an interesting question, but one thing that I think is really important for startups to understand is that money's not free anymore. And I mean, if you do a DCF, since you're all Booth students, you can have an NPV on a company that loses money for a few years, and then it has a giant terminal value. But once that discount rate goes from 0 to some positive number, the less attractive that value starts to get. And obviously, the higher the number that goes, the more the near-term losses contribute to the total NPV of the company. And I say that because I had dinner with a venture capitalist last night who sits on a lot of boards, and he just switched firms. And so he's sitting on all these board meetings for the first time. And a lot of them are doing things in AI and fintech, most of them, in fact. But he realized that not all of them calculate LTV to CAC the same way. And that's the metric that people have used to justify a lot of these operating losses. And on top of that, I've spent a lot of the last 10 years asking founders, what moves the needle the most on your LTV to CAC ratio? And, they'll talk about retention or same store sales growth or acquisition costs. But honestly, the right answer, which no one ever says, I've had one person say this in the last 10 years, the discount rate when I compute the long-term value, right? And so I really think we've been in this era where money's been free. And so the zeitgeist around startups has been product, product, product. And I really think we're swinging back when money's not free, where it's going to be more about financial discipline. So I think it's easy to have blanket statements, and I think most of the times they're not really the right things. This is about a lot of small solutions to niche problems. But one blanket statement that I'm confident making is that there has to be a clear path and intent to profitability, and that the days of free money are gone. And I think the business model and the use case and the products, they all have to fit into a business plan that has profitability happening faster than it has in the last 10 years. And I don't think the world has caught on to that fully yet, but I think that's going to be a very important thing to pay attention to.
Thank you so much. So we're almost running out of time. Let's summarize. Let's move on to the last topic, which I think is very important for our audience. Many of us are MBA. As James and Avi, they are Booth alumni. They have been out of Booth for years. So maybe it's time for you to actually, first of all, tell us, educators, like how should MBA education adapt to a future with AI and fintech? So maybe we'll start with James.
Well, when I got to Booth in 2005, the dean at the time talked about the discipline-based approach. And if we learn disciplines, statistics and econometrics, financial accounting, strategy, finance, we can apply those disciplines to new areas and new domains as they evolve. And that has been absolutely true in my experience. And I'll just share one little anecdote. I have gotten one F on a test in my entire life. And it was the first week in Eugene Fama's Theory of Financial Decisions class. And it was a take-home test. And the answers would have to contain a number, and they would have to contain language explaining the number and why that was important. And I got most of the numbers right. But anytime I used the wrong word, whether it was a statistical term or even a verb, Professor Fama would give me a 0 on that question. And it was a powerful lesson in how much words and terminology matter that I've never forgotten. And I actually think that lesson that Gene Fama gave me is critically important in AI, because as we've seen the work that your organization at Booth has done, parameter specification is so important. If we don't use the right words, we get bias, or we get a model doing something that we, different from what we think it's doing. So I really think the discipline-based approach and the attention to details has served me well and will probably continue to serve current students well.
Thank you. Avi?
Yeah, I second what James said. Dean Snyder, my time as well, class of 08, so we overlap, James. Yeah, one very interesting thought I got from, I think, a senior was that you will not use everything that you learn in school all the time. At any given point of time, you're going to use maybe 5 to 10% of what you learned at school. But what you use changes over time, right? And funnily enough, I'm using more of the more basic courses now as I'm growing older, right? More of the softer skills, more of the fundamentals, the disciplines, as James, because it helps you think through the tougher problems. The beauty is real world problems require original thinking, right? And if you need to do original thinking, you need to have some first principles to fall back on, right? And that's where I think Booth education has held me in great stead. And also, I think the confidence that you get just rubbing shoulders with so many smart people, I think that makes a heck of a lot of difference. I think some of the courses that I don't know if they're offered today, but if there is anything around fintech, anything around AI, I see the AI Center, so I'm sure there are courses that both alums are now able to take, which we didn't have. And I think that's great. I think those are things which will make a huge difference in terms of people getting opportunity to learn, because I'm sure that a lot of folks who are interested, a lot of students who are interested in that.
Thank you. So Christina, do you have any career advice to our MBAs?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess two pieces of advice. One is one piece of advice I'd love to give everyone is just, for my job, by the way, it's all about getting rejected a lot. And I know for a lot of you guys who are currently in school, or even if you're in your career anywhere along your career, it's like at some point you're going to apply to jobs, apply to new opportunities, look for, different things out there, right? And you're going to get rejected at some point. And I think just know that like rejection is a normal part of even my job today. I continue to get rejected by hundreds of investors. and the thing is that if I didn't get those rejections, I wouldn't be where I am today, and so it's kind of like the rejections help you to get to that eventual yes. And it's normal to be rejected. I remember the first time I was rejected in college, I was a freshman applying to an internship. And I still remember the day they said no to me, and I like cried in my dorm room. And my friend was like, "Oh my God, Christina, you can't be crying every time you get a no from a job. It's like if you did that, you would, you can't get anywhere in life, right? With that kind of like, it's just normal and understanding that. And now that I'm on the employer side of the table, by the way, I see that all the time because the most we have a variety of different job openings, by the way, for our company. And the most popular role that gets the most number of job applicants is the software engineering internship, by the way. We do have a non-technical internship. We have a marketing internship. We have like a social media internship. We have all these full-time positions in all kinds of areas. And surprisingly, the number one position that gets probably about 50 times more resumes than any other job out there is as SWE, so software engineering internship. And we get about, I would say, 1,500 applicants a week just for that role. To give you, it is like astronomical. And so I'm seeing that now, and I'm like, okay, I feel bad because there's a lot of great candidates in the pipeline, but we have to reject them because we are a company with 28 people. We're tiny. We can't accommodate everyone. And so now we're seeing that picture, and I'm the one that's having to do the rejecting, and it hurts. I totally get it. Like, the candidates, it totally sucks, but to be on the receiving side of that. But then for me, I've learned to normalize rejection, even for my own job when I get rejected by our investors, put it on a mountain of rejections and just learn to like try to move on. And every time I'm human, so of course every time it's still kind of, if it's something I worked really hard towards, it still hurts, right? You interview so many times, you make it to the final round, you still get a no. That absolutely sucks. We're not a robot. It's not that easy to move on sometimes, but still I try my best. It's getting easier every time to be able to move on and go to the next opportunity, etc. So that's one piece. And then the other really quick piece of advice is just I used to have a child mentality when I was in college, meaning I thought I was a kid and all my professors are the adults in the room, and all the guest speakers and lecturers coming in are like the adults in the room. And I used to have that mentality until when I started my first company, and I would go ask a lawyer for help and I'd be like, hey, like, is it okay if I'm so sorry to bother you? Is it okay to work with you? And I was very like polite and kind of stepping on eggshells a little bit. And the lawyer responded back and be like, you sound like a kid, and he's like, we didn't want to work with you. And it was funny because we actually had $10 million in funding, but they just were like, no, these people didn't know what they were doing. And after that, I realized, okay, wait a second, I'm an adult. I already graduated. Like, I'm an adult. I have a lot of value to offer. And so why am I like not offering value to people? And so now, like, for every time I'm asking for advice, I always say, hey, by the way, like I can, how can I help you? Right. So if you're a student and you're looking for a job and they haven't responded back to you, for example, you can email the employer and be like, hey, by the way, I can forward your job posting to my class or to, my dorm room or my student club, right? Or, hey, you're welcome to come speak at my student club, for example. And then I can guarantee you they will probably respond to that because you as a student are providing value to an employer. So you too have value that you can bring. It's just that I didn't realize it when I was a student. So those are the two things I would offer is just know your worth, know that you have value to bring, but also make sure to understand, yes, rejections still happen and to be okay with that and just try your best to move on every time. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much for all of you for sharing your insight, your experience, your wisdom to us today. And it's pity that we have to conclude now. And thank you very much, Emily.
Thank you, Da-Cheng, and thank you to all our speakers, James, Avi, Christina. What a great conversation. I know there were so many questions we didn't get to, and I apologize for that. And so many topics we could have spent all day here, I think, or all night in Avi's case. I just want to say again, thank you to everyone, and thank you to our attendees. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter to find out about future events, please do so. I'm just going to leave this slide up here for a few minutes before I shut down the room. Please visit us and do that. We'd love to see you in the future, and hope all of you have a great weekend, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.